Dear friends, greetings and very good evening to all of you from Christian Medical College, Vellore and the COVID Command Center Training Desk. As we experience a decreasing trend in this COVID pandemic, we are faced with an ongoing issue of increasing mucormycosis in such patients. This is a continuation of a highly informative part 1 session, which was held on 7th June, where we heard from a multidisciplinary clinical team from CMC who were prepared to deal with the situation. The efforts of the clinical team is incomplete without an equally competent and a supportive diagnostic team. And CMC is blessed to have a dedicated team of radiologists, pathologists, microbiologists who provide huge support towards providing a comprehensive care for such patients. Today's part 2 session on mucormycosis will be bringing you the expertise of such a team. And as we begin this session, I share a short prayer of our founder, Dr. Ida Scudder, which she said to gain strength from the Almighty. Father, whose life is within me and whose love is ever about me, grant that thy life may be maintained in my life today and every day, that with gladness of heart, without haste or confusion of thought, I may go about my daily tasks, conscious of ability to meet every rightful demand, seeing the larger meaning of little things, and finding beauty and love everywhere. And in the sense of thy presence, may I walk through the hours, breathing the atmosphere of love rather than anxious striving. Amen. I now invite Professor Elizabeth Joseph, Head of Radiology at CMC Vellore, to moderate this session. Over to you, Dr. Elizabeth.
Thank you, Ram. It gives me great pleasure to invite you for the second part of the session on multidisciplinary management of rhinocerebral mucormycosis in the context of the current COVID-19 pandemic, emphasizing on diagnosis. Today, the radiology, pathology, and microbiology departments will be sharing their vast experience on COVID-associated mucormycosis. Radiology plays a vital role in mapping the entire extent of the disease and provides a roadmap to surgeons. The success of the multidisciplinary approach lies in the close coordination between surgeons and radiologists to enable optimal surgical clearance and follow-up of these patients. As in all areas of medicine, pathology and microbiology have the last word on the final diagnosis. These specialties are indispensable for accurate identification of the causal organism. Pathology provides additional information on tissue invasion and disease in the debrided specimens. Timely reports from pathology and microbiology have enabled the early interventions which are life-saving. We will start with radiology. Dr. Seelam Joshua is an assistant professor in the Department of Radiology, CMC Vellore, and is at the diagnostic team's frontline looking at mucormycosis. He will be giving us his talk on head and neck imaging, which is focused on the PNS.
Good morning, good evening, everyone, teachers, friends. I would be presenting a few cases from over the past 2 months, over the second wave, which we have seen of invasive fungal sinusitis, the radiological aspects of it. COVID-19, we know that the second wave has been very, very devastating. It's a younger cohort which has been affected more. And usually it's the second and third week of illness which has caused a lot of these complications. So COVID-associated mucormycosis, the most common site that we have observed is the paranasal sinuses. A few cases we have also reported in the lungs. Does COVID-19 cause, is there a definite association? We are not sure. There's an uncertain causal relationship. However, we have observed that about 60% of patients have current COVID infection at the time of diagnosis, as well as 40% of them are post-COVID, that is at least 3 weeks since their swab was positive. And an interesting thing to note is more than 70% of these patients have received steroid during their treatment or are in the process of receiving steroids. So there have been a lot of possible pathogenesis. This has been extensively covered in the last talk. Hypoxia, as an acidotic state, hyperglycemic state, increased iron and decrease in phagocytic activity, which is compounded by our use of steroids and specific immunosuppressants. So these have been discussed in detail. So going straight into the ideal radiological study for invasive fungal sinusitis, in centers where only a CT scan is available, a CT scan of the paranasal sinuses with contrast is recommended, and a bone and soft tissue kernel and coronal as well as sagittal reformatted images are preferable. An ideal of 1 to 2 millimeter sections also. In centers where an MR is preferable or the clinician has a doubt, an MR is indicated. The sequences, the bare minimum that we recommend is a thin T2 sections or a stir sequence, at least 3 millimeter sections, diffusion and apparent diffusion coefficient maps, post-contrast fat suppressed sections, specifically through the orbits or the paranasal sinuses, again with multiplanar reformatted images. And for both CT as well as MR, we need an ideal field of view to cover the vertex to the upper neck. So this is just a checklist that most of us have been following over the past 2 months. This is just a rough checklist. You can go in whichever order you want. So this includes the nose, the paranasal sinuses, the orbits, intracranial extension, the skull base, as well as some deep neck spaces. We'll be covering each of these in some detail. So going on to one of our first cases that we had reported. So on the left is a paranasal sinus CT, contrast enhanced, which shows there is soft tissue opacification of the right maxillary sinus as well as the right ethmoid sinus. However, we can't say if this is invasion or not. However, if we look at the MR, we are seeing that there is the middle turbinate as well as the inferior turbinate. There is the soft tissue which is not at all enhancing. This is a coronal fat saturated post-contrast sequence. So this is a very specific sequence. So this has been described as a black turbinate sign. Although this is described in the nose, it can be seen anywhere along in the orbits, in the skull base, in the brain. So this is a very specific sign for mucormycosis. If this sign is seen, there is no other diagnosis. This is another patient where the anterior cartilaginous part of the nasal septum is enlarged. There's a centrally hypodense component and a peripherally enhancing component. This was confirmed on intra-op as a septal abscess. This is another patient where the bone window certainly helps us. If you look on the left, there are lucencies in the alveolar process of the maxilla on the left side. So how does this change management? So other than the endoscopic debridement that ENT surgeons offer, they would also offer inferior partial maxillectomy or a total maxillectomy in terms of management. So this changes management. This is another patient where the osteomyelitis is much more florid. There are a lot of air foci within the left alveolar process. There's an abscess which is extending into the buccomesenteric plane. So this helps in the surgical management, the planning as to how much should be debrided. Orbits, very briefly, this was a patient who had presented, who we had reported on call, was from Chittoor campus. Here we see this was the clinical history they had provided was headache. So at the first instance, we see that the brain parenchyma is of normal attenuation. There are no focal hypodensities. However, in the ethmoid sinus, there is ill-defined soft tissue. And if we change it to an appropriate soft tissue window, we see that there is ethmoid sinus disease, as well as left-sided intraorbital fat stranding, as well as subtle proptosis. And then we went back and asked the history. This patient was a young diabetic with sugars of over 400. Ketones were positive. So we had suggested a possibility of mucormycosis, and this patient was picked up early, debrided early, and now he's doing well. This is an objective way of assessing proptosis. So because of the inflammation in the retroorbital fat in the intraconal as well as the extraconal compartment, there is, even without measurement, we can see that the posterior margin of the globe is much anterior on the left side compared to the right side. So this is proptosis. For measurements, 23 millimeters is what we take as cutoff. This is another patient, florid right-sided paranasal sinus disease. We are seeing right-sided proptosis, lot of intraconal as well as extraconal fat stranding. And we are seeing the guitar pick sign, which is the tenting of the posterior orbit, the posterior globe, because there is stuff trying to push it out, as well as the optic nerve is trying to tug it back in. So this is another patient where radiology helps. So here, this is a patient who will require some sort of pressure release in terms of either a canthotomy or a cantholysis to relieve the tension within the right intraorbital compartment. This is another patient where we can see that there is a subperiosteal abscess along the medial margin of the left orbit along the lamina papracia. Incidentally, this patient also had a dehiscent lamina papracia on the left side. So this also has to be surgically drained. This is another patient we have seen where there is right-sided proptosis, and this is diffusion restriction of the optic nerve almost along its entire course. We can observe that there is loss of signal on the ADC map. These patients don't do well even despite debridement because of the inflammation. The posterior ischemic optic neuropathy, the smaller vessels which supply the optic nerve are, because of angioinvasion, they are infarcted. So these patients don't do well. This is another vascular complication where the left superior ophthalmic vein is engorged. This is the same patient's MR. Here we can see the peripherally enhancing wall of the superior ophthalmic vein and the centrally non-enhancing thrombus. It's extending all the way posteriorly till the orbital apex and also to the left cavernous sinus. So we've finished the orbits, we've finished the paranasal sinuses. Briefly going through the intracranial involvement, this is another patient in which had come with a frozen globe, no movements on the left side, no extraocular movements on the left side. Here we see that there is hypo intensity on the lateral aspect of the left cavernous sinus, suggestive of thrombosis. This was as a result of contiguous extension from the left orbital apex to the left cavernous sinus. This was another patient we had initially picked up on the CT. We can see that there is a subtle hypodensity in the anteromedial left temporal lobe. This patient underwent sinonasal debridement. However, 2 weeks later, as he was receiving the appropriate antifungals, he developed neurological symptoms in the ward for which an MR was ordered. Here we see that the lesion, which is in the anteromedial temporal lobe, has progressed to a much larger size. And this is the same patient where we are seeing central diffusion restriction, loss of signal centrally on the ADC maps, and peripheral enhancement. So this was a temporal lobe abscess. So the neurosurgeon should be involved in this and should be involved in debriding this and draining this as well. Another patient where the extent matters a lot. So here we can see that the left cavernous sinus is much bulkier compared to the left side, as well as the left internal carotid artery. The cavernous segment is thickened as compared to the right side. This just shows that, so what is the importance of picking up this finding? These patients, in spite of our best surgical as well as medical management, are at a higher risk for developing strokes because of the ICA being involved. This is another patient, post-contrast fat-saturated sequence, which shows there is thickening in the petrous as well as paraclival segments of the right internal carotid artery. So these patients, and there is extensive disease, paranasal disease, as well as right orbital disease. So these patients, it's imperative that we pick up these findings, and when they come on follow-up 3 months later, we should see if there are any new infarcts in the affected arterial segments. Very quickly going on to the deep neck spaces. So this is a patient who's got right-sided disease. There is a left side for comparison. We are seeing the retromaxillary fat as well as the premaxillary fat is relatively clean. There is no inflammation. Whereas if you see on the right side, there is a lot of inflammation. There's ill-defined soft tissue, which is extending in the premaxillary as well as the retroantral fat. So on an MR, it's much more better seen as hyperintensity. This just, I just wanted to highlight the importance of a fat saturated T2 sequence. Even if we don't have contrast, a fat saturated T2 sequence is very sensitive to pick up these subtle changes. This is another patient, much more florid inflammation. Here we are seeing on the CT that there is peripherally enhancing centrally hypodense abscesses in the premaxillary as well as the retroantral regions. Another patient where that is the normal left parapharyngeal fat for comparison. The fat is quite clean on the left side. On the right side here, we are seeing that there is a peripherally enhancing abscess, as well as in the right masticator space, the fat planes between the pterygoid muscles are not so well visualized on the right side, and the fat saturated MRI T2 sequence depicts this inflammation very well. So there's extension of the abscess into the parapharyngeal fat, the right masticator space. There's another abscess just beneath at the right level 2 station, just beneath the sternocleidomastoid on the right side. So fungal infection can be quite extensive. Deep neck spaces is another point to be ticked out in the checklist. Just to highlight the importance, a few slides to highlight the importance, even as most of these patients are in some sort of acute kidney injury when they present, the importance of a T2 weighted MR. This just shows on the CT, we can see that there is opacification of the right paranasal sinuses. The right medial rectus is involved. However, if you see on the MR, the temporalis is much better appreciated. There is inflammation involving the right temporalis muscle. So transfacial involvement, always think of invasive infection. This is another patient where the inflammation is much more florid, involving the right masticator space, the right nasopharynx, the longus colli muscles. So MRI is much better at picking up soft tissue extent. This is another patient where there was a right pterygopalatine fossa abscess. This is another patient where there was, on the left side, there was a pterygopalatine fossa abscess with contiguous extension. I would like to close with this interesting case that we had seen. This was a patient who had extensive paranasal disease, lot of inflammatory change involving the premaxillary fat, the buccal space on the right side. On the T2, we can see that there is signal change involving the anteromedial temporal lobe, which is an expected location. And we are also seeing that there's a wedge-shaped hypodensity involving the right cerebellar hemisphere and part of the vermis. On ADC maps, all these were showing diffusion restriction. And on the post-contrast fat-saturated sequence, we are seeing this is a normal site for comparison. That is the foramen ovale. That's the foramen spinosum. Here we are seeing on the right side that there is extension of inflammation along the left foramen ovale. So this patient had infarcts in a region which is non-contiguous in the cerebellum because there was dural disease as well as perineural spread of this infection. So this treatment has been covered extensively. The take-home point is debride as early as possible as well. So this is where radiology comes in. So pick up subtle findings, raise the possibility of an invasive fungal sinusitis. Multiple drugs we have seen. And so just going back at all the things that we have covered, the nose, the paranasal sinuses, the orbits, the intracranial extension part of it, the skull base, as well as the deep neck spaces. So the take-home message is diabetes and COVID is a very bad combination for invasive fungal sinusitis. Please check out for subtle findings when appropriate clinical history such as diabetes, uncontrolled diabetes, as well as diabetic ketoacidosis is present. And always request for an MRI if there are doubtful findings on CT, and have a checklist at the back of your mind. It's a lifesaver. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Aparna, Dr. Pavitra, and Dr. Harshad for helping me with this talk and reporting, also helping us report many of these cases. Stay safe. Thank you for your patient listening. We will try to answer the questions on the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joshua, for that great presentation. This talk will be available online 3 days from now. We encourage you to type in your queries into the chat box during the talk itself, and answers will be put in whenever possible. The main questions will be answered at the end of the entire session. We shall move on to our next speaker, Dr. Meera Thomas, who is a professor in pathology, CMC Vellore, with a special interest in head and neck pathology and dermatopathology. Her expertise is in the area of infectious diseases and infiltrative lesions. I hand over to Dr. Meera.
Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth. And I especially like to thank the COVID Command Center for giving us this opportunity to talk about the pathology of mucormycosis. After listening to the clinicians tell us what are the symptoms and signs to look for in invasive mucormycosis, and the radiologists tell us what would you see when you do a radiological examination, we need to do pathology to confirm the diagnosis. So that's mucormycosis for you. Mucormycosis can be seen in different areas of the body. It can be seen in the rhinocerebral region, can be seen in the lungs, can be seen in the skin, GI tract in young children, or it can be disseminated. Very rarely it can present as an infection in the kidney. Today's topic will be predominantly centered only around rhinocerebral mucormycosis. Something which we already know, that fungal sinusitis per se is an allergic response to inhaled fungal pathogens. Most common one being Aspergillus species, and which presents either as atopy or common cold or as polyps. But the pathogenesis per se has been controversial. We've had many people giving different arguments for the inflammatory response, whether it's T or B, leading on to perpetuating cycle of inflammation with obstruction and antigenic exposure. And again, this high glycemic index leading on to increased production of the hyphae itself, metabolic acidosis, preventing chemotaxis and phagocytosis, and the hyphae proliferating, leading on to endothelial and epithelial cell damage. These are some of the proposed pathogenesis. Now, once it comes to pathology, we need to decide how are we going to classify the infection which we see in the tissue. So we've had many people talk about it from 2009 onwards, and they have classified mainly into non-invasive and invasive fungal sinusitis. The non-invasive is predominantly a fungal ball or allergic mucin, whereas the invasive component can be acute or chronic. The chronic can be either chronic inflammatory or chronic granulomatous rhinosinusitis. We're only going to talk about invasive fungal rhinosinusitis today. Acute invasive rhinosinusitis is a life-threatening infection seen in immunocompromised individuals. Either it could be uncontrolled diabetes, including ketoacidosis, post-bone marrow transplants, hematological malignancies on chemo, or post-COVID on steroids. What do we see on histology? We see an extensively infarcted tissue with scattered neutrophils and karyotic debris, within which are seen numerous hyphae of varied shapes and sizes. Here it is eosinophilic within the infarcted stroma. And they are eosinophilic sometimes, but better seen when they are basophilic. They are aseptate, show obtuse angle branching, can be folded on itself, like you see in some of these fragments. And they are large, much larger than you would normally see in Aspergillus. They can also show angioinvasion, like you see here, and invasion into the bone marrow spaces. That's what the arrow is pointing at. What is chronic invasive rhinosinusitis, fungal rhinosinusitis? Chronic invasive fungal rhinosinusitis is when you have a hyphae or a spore which is seen in the stroma of a tissue which doesn't have necrosis or infarction, or it doesn't have any granulomas. You can see lymphocytes, histiocytes, some plasma cells, and you can see a small fungal spore right in the stroma of this tissue. This is chronic invasive rhinosinusitis, usually associated with Aspergillus, not with mucor. Here you can see a fungal ball with the fungal hyphae going into the stroma, causing chronic invasive rhinosinusitis. Chronic invasive granulomatous rhinosinusitis is usually seen in immunocompetent individuals, usually presenting as a masked lesion, and almost always it was said that it's due to Aspergillus flavus. But in this pandemic, we have seen many cases of mucorales causing chronic invasive granulomatous fungal rhinosinusitis. What do you see? You see a granuloma composed of epithelioid histiocytes, lymphocytes, multinucleated giant cells of both the Langhans and foreign body type, with central area of suppuration. This is a higher part of the same. And within that suppurative area with karyorectic debris, there's a PAS stain showing you the fungal hyphae of varied sizes folded on itself, which have very thin walls. That's the mucorales which are seen in the center of this granuloma. A 55-year-old diabetic who complained of headache for the last 1 month was noticed to have an ulcer on in the mouth of 2 weeks duration. So a biopsy was done. What did we see? On the biopsy, we saw lots of neutrophils with karyorectic debris on one side, within which we saw fungal hyphae of varied sizes and shapes. Some are long and thin, some are broad and fat. On the other side, there's a granuloma. Here's a granuloma with epithelioid histiocytes, scattered lymphocytes, and few multinucleate giant cells. So we did PAS and GMS, the two stains which are normally done for fungus. This is a GMS or a Grocod's methenamine silver stain, where you can see you've got hyphae of mucor on the left side and hyphae of uniform width, which show acute angle branching and are septate on the other side. So you have Aspergillus on one side and mucor, both invasive components in this particular patient. That's mixed fungal sinusitis with mixed pattern of invasion and two different fungi being present. Treatment is different for both, so you need to identify them on histology. In 2021, we have seen a little different pattern. A fungal ball usually is something like this. So usually a fungal ball is an entangled mass of fungal hyphae, which are usually septate. What you can see here is you have septate fungal hyphae of uniform width, some of which show acute angle branching. Associated with it, you also have some larger fungal hyphae here, which are non-septate. Just another part of the same thing. You can see them. You've got larger fungal hyphae, which are aseptate, and fungal hyphae, which are septate. We also have small yeast forms right here, probably about 7 to 8 microns in size, which form pseudo hyphae as well here. So we've got 3 different species of fungi in the same histological picture. You've got Aspergillus in the fungal ball, you've got mucor again within the fungal ball, and Candida. Incidentally, we also had acute invasive mucor within the stroma of this particular patient. This is angioinvasion, the fungal hyphae seen within the blood vessel of a patient with acute invasive mucormycosis. Another patient in the recent past who was a known diabetic, COVID positive, presented with eye pain of 2 days duration. Culture showed broad aseptate fungi. What did we see on histology? We saw extensively necrotic tissue, within which are these broad fungal hyphae of varied width, with some brown spores and maybe about 10 to 12 microns in size, and even smaller spores, maybe about 7 to 8 microns in size adjacent to it. A higher part of the same tissue where you can see all the 3 different shapes of these spores. You've got hyphae, there's a tangential cut of the hyphae, which are aseptate, the brown spores of Aspergillus, and the small yeast forms of Candida. So 3 different organisms in the same biopsy. Something else which we are seeing now, which we never used to earlier, is these large spores. If I had seen only one of them, I would have said, oh my gosh, it looks like coccidioidomycosis. But then you look under higher power in different areas of the same, you have multiple sporangia like these with immature spores within them. So you have all stages of the fungus in the same tissue. These are sporangia with immature spores inside. You have pigmented hyphae, which are usually resistant to treatment, which are again folded on itself. Pigmented spores or zygospores, which have got pigment in them here. And you've got the other aseptate fungal hyphae as well. So this was acute invasive mucormycosis, but with all the stages. So probably it's growing very quickly in the patient. We just did in 2018, what we found is the invasive component, invasive mucormycosis, invasive fungal rhinosinusitis was only about 30 patients, of which the acute invasive were predominantly zygomycetes, and the granulomatous ones were either zygomycetes or Aspergillus or entomophthalmomycosis. Now in 2021, what we find is there are 3 times the number of cases that we used to see in 2018. More mucorales and Aspergillus and more acute invasive mucormycosis than chronic invasive granulomatous rhinosinusitis. So now how do you go about diagnosing a case of invasive mucormycosis? You can do a biopsy of the necrotic tissue that you see or the bone and send it in 10% formalin, or you can do a frozen section of the tissue. Remember, when you do a frozen, send it in saline or send it fresh tissue as is in a container. I'll just show you a little bit of what we do when a frozen is done. So first we identify the tissue from the name and hospital number, tease it from the bottle onto a clean glass slide, take it to the cryostat, which is kept at -20 degrees. The tissue, first we put cryo-embedding medium onto the chuck, allow it to freeze, then put the tissue on the chuck with the cryo-embedding medium on top, again allow it to freeze. While it is freezing, you label 2 slides as FS, put a weight on the chuck so that you flatten the tissue, and then take it to the microtome, take the chuck to the microtome, fix a fresh blade on the microtome, and cut thin 4-micron sections on the microtome. Once you get ribbons of sections, you put it onto a slide. A rapid H&E staining is done, where you first put it in alcohol, then you wash it in water, then stain with hematoxylin for 30 seconds, then again wash with water, and then run it through lithium carbonate. You blue in it, you run it through alcohol, eosin, changes of alcohol, that's eosin, and then xylene. Then you keep it in hot xylene, take it onto a slide, cover slip it. After that, we observe it under the microscope. So what do we see under the microscope? We see these refractile particles on the section, which are aseptate, or in necrotic tissue, we can see spores or which look like empty spaces, which actually, if you turn the fine adjustment up and down, they're refractile too. Or you can just see them as pink structures or eosinophilic structures, which again are the hyphae of mucor within the necrotic tissue. A higher part of that area showing you the hyphae of mucor. It takes some time for you to recognize the eosinophilic and the basophilic structures in the necrotic tissue, which are folded on itself and have very thin walls. This whole tissue is necrotic. Since everything is basophilic, it takes some getting used to before you can identify the mucor. The problem with mucor is it doesn't stain well with PAS, the usual stain which we use for fungus. It stains very lightly with PAS. It stains well with GMS. Unfortunately, for GMS, you need to keep it for 1 hour in an incubator. So by then, all your cryo media will melt. So we cannot use GMS for a frozen section. This is one of the rare mucor which stained well with PAS. You can also see angioinvasion on frozen. This is a patient who had acute invasive fungal sinusitis with aseptate fungal hyphae of various sizes associated with yeast and pseudohyphae, which stained very well with PAS. The yeast and pseudohyphae stained. We also had a few structures which showed acute angle branching, identifying the aspergillus. So on frozen, actually, it's easy, not easy, but we can diagnose mucor more easily than aspergillus or candida. We have had patients in the recent past when we saw necrotic tissue on frozen and PAS didn't show anything. It was only on the GMS done on the paraffin embedded tissue that we saw this folded mucor fungus hyphae, whereas the culture was positive for mucormycosis. One of the problems we have is when we have spaces like these, which are actually freezing artifacts which can resemble mucor. So you can have a false positive when you do a frozen section. So frozen section you can do to identify the presence of fungus, to differentiate whether it's invasive or non-invasive, or whether there is angioinvasion, to differentiate between aspergillus and zygo, and also to identify multiple fungi. What are the disadvantages? You may miss aspergillus, you may have freezing artifacts which give you false positives, or it may be given from a very superficial biopsy where you may not be able to identify the organism at all, or you may take it from an unsampled area and you may give a false negative report. We have had about 67 frozen sections in the last 5 weeks, of which 36 of them have turned positive for mucorales. We have had 5 patients who are negative on frozen but positive on biopsy. Now, this discrepancy between frozen and biopsy was mainly due to sampling error, superficial biopsy specimen, and inability to do GMS on frozen sections. Smear or culture was positive for these only in 27 of these cases. So what do you do when biopsy is positive and culture is negative? There are newer techniques, either PCR, using fresh tissue, or FISH, which Joy will talk about. PCR, what they can do to identify these organisms. So to summarize, invasive fungal rhinosinusitis can be diagnosed on biopsy and frozen section. Zygomycosis is the most common fungus in acute invasive sinusitis. Most patients with acute invasive sinusitis may also have a chronic component, whether it's due to better immunity or better control of their immunosuppressive state is still debatable. FS or frozen is very useful in diagnosis of mucor. Angioinvasion can be diagnosed on frozen itself, and frozen is better for diagnosis of mucor than culture for reasons which will be talked about later. Newer techniques are available if cultures are negative. So I'd like to conclude by saying that in this pandemic, when we have an epidemic of mucor, early diagnosis is necessity and should be done by doing frozens and smears with a high degree of suspicion by the clinician, radiologist, pathologist, and microbiologist. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Meera, for making pathology come alive. Our last speaker is Dr. Joy Sarojini Michael, Professor and Head of Clinical Microbiology. She is the Secretary of the Hospital Infection Control Committee. She has a special interest in mycobacteriology and mycology, including conventional, serological, and molecular diagnosis of fungal infections. Over to you, Dr. Joy.
Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth, and thank you to the CCC committee and the team for conducting the session. So what I'll do today is talk about an overview of fungal diagnostics, what we do, and then concentrate on the diagnosis of mucormycosis, what we do in the lab, and answer some of the questions that already have been raised in the chat box. So to give you an overview of the fungal pathogens, fungi can be divided into molds of filamentous fungi, and they are commonly, you will know them as Aspergillus or mucormycosis that we are going to talk about today, the mucormycosis or filamentous fungi. They are like plants. They have hyphae, which is seen here, and they grow as flowering plants, and they are very colorful. And the next group is yeasts. These yeasts are single-celled organisms, and they grow like bacteria-like colonies on the plates, and you can see them as gram-positive budding yeasts with pseudohyphae in the gram stain. And Candida and Crypto are the yeast that we isolate in the organism in the department commonly. So in between this yeast and molds are organisms called dimorphic fungi, which actually in the body are in the yeast phase. And when they are grown in culture, they are in the filamentous phase. So the commonest dimorphic fungi we see is Histoplasma capsulatum, and the others are Talaromyces marnifiei, earlier called as Penicillium marnifiei. There is another organism called Nemocystis erovetsi, or it was earlier called Nemocystis carinii, which was earlier thought to be a parasite, but now it's a fungi. So these are the various organisms that we isolate in the department. And what do we do for lab diagnostics? We do microscopy, we do culture, we do serology, either ELISA or immunochromatographic tests, and we also do molecular diagnostics for diagnosis of fungal infections. So once they grow, so once we see it in the microscopy and once they grow, what do we do? If they are yeast, we do a germ tube, we do chromagar, we put it and look for early and rapid speciation of these organisms. We put it through some biochemicals and sugars called urease and assimilation and fermentation. And finally, we have a rapid speciation method called MALDI-TOF which we differentiate, the species are differentiated in 15 minutes based on their protein matrix. Then there is filamentous fungi. Filamentous fungi, mainly we depend on morphology. We look at the lactophenol cotton blue preparation, and also we can do MALDI-TOF ID, which is also rapid, so within a day. And those which we cannot identify by these methods, we can do molecular sequencing and give you a rapid diagnosis. So going on to mucormycosis. So what are the samples we commonly receive? We commonly receive samples from patients with rhinocerebral mucormycosis. We get tissue samples. We prefer not to get swabs, but after a lot of discussion with the surgeons, now we are happy that we get good tissue, but even now we actually get smaller amounts and lesser representative than pathology. So it's very difficult for us to interpret certain tissue, and there is some discrepancy between pathology and microbiology in some of the cultures. Pulmonary, we get sputum, we get bronchoalveolar lavage, we get ET aspirates from patients, from immunocompromised patients, from hematology. And from hematology patients, especially when taking samples is very difficult. They do send us blood, CSF or serum or BAL for diagnosing it either by antigen detection or by doing molecular testing. So just a note or a plea to the surgeons, please send the tissues from the theater as soon as possible in ambient temperature. Please do not refrigerate, because refrigeration will cause mucormycosis to become non-viable. Send us deep tissue. Please don't send us superficial tissue, but because in the recent COVID pandemic time, when we started getting a lot of samples, some samples were sent from the nasal crust, from superficial samples were sent to us, and we were getting more of Aspergillus niger, which is a common colonizer in the nose and in the environment, and we were not able to isolate the mucormycosis that was sitting deep within the tissue. So we request you to send deeper tissues to us. And also, when you send samples for microbiology, please send it in sterile saline. Do not send it in paraffin, in formalin. Do not refrigerate the sample. Do not delay in sending the sample. Send it as soon as possible, because mucormycosis are very delicate organisms, very thin-walled, and they do die very quickly. And like I told you, please send us deeper tissue and do not send it in formalin. So going on to tell you about what we do in the lab. So we get the tissue samples, which you can see on the left extreme. And then we have to be very careful when we process these samples. So I'll be going a little bit in detail for people who are from the lab, who are listening, and so that I can clarify some of the doubts that you have asked, and any other doubts that you have regarding the lab processing. And then once we take the tissue, we look at it under the microscope, using one of the two techniques that I'll be talking to you. And then finally, we culture the organism. And once it grows, we'll be doing antifungal susceptibility testing. So in the lab, those of you who are from the lab, please remember, transfer this material from whatever container you're getting into a sterile petri dish. Put some sterile saline to it so that you'll be able to visualize the tissue well. And then look for the necrotic tissue, because the necrotic tissue is the one where you will find your mucormycosis or any diseased tissue, not healthy tissue. So then use sterile scissors and forceps, and do not mince it. Handle it very carefully and tease it, and make multiple preparations. So there was a question that was raised earlier on Monday as well as today, that if I see one hyphae in one preparation, please look at your clinical details, ask whether you're getting a deeper tissue. If you have a deeper tissue, make multiple preparations. Make sure you get it in other preparations also, because this can be contaminants, because muca, as you know, is there in the environment. So is Aspergillus. So these hyphae can be seen even in the superficial tissue, may not indicate infection. So please make sure that you make multiple preparations before you can call it a positive sample. And whatever diseased, or that is the necrotic material you have, please inoculate it into the culture plates. So there are two kinds of preparations you can do. Microscopy is the cheapest method you can do to get an early diagnosis. And it's also very rapid in a smaller hospital also. Put the potassium hydroxide, which is freely available, 10%, 1 drop, and then put your tissue in it and leave it for some time. Because potassium hydroxide digests your tissue, and it'll be able to, once it digests the tissue, you'll be able to see the hyphae better. And you can see it in any light microscope that you have in your lab. Chalcofluor white is a fluorescent dye. It's a fluorochrome dye. Blancofluor white is also a fluorochrome dye. It has affinity to the chitin of the fungi. So what happens, it goes and attaches to it. And if you put it along with the chalcofluor, along with the 10% KOH, KOH will digest the tissue, and it will expose your the fungi, which will fluorescent green or blue. And I'll show you in the next slide. And you have to view it under a fluorescent microscope. So this is a slightly costlier version of the microscopy. So here you have just going to tell you the difference between septate and aseptate hyphae. or sparsely septate hyphae. Here you have a hyphae which is uniform in size, branching at acute angles. You have septations. Okay, so it's like a plant. It's like a okay, the molds, and then you can also see is a septate hyphae. Sometimes, especially from the paranasal sinuses, you can see the even the flowering heads of Aspergillus. So you can see in the middle, you can see that there is the flowering head, the vesicles. You can see the vesicle and then the medullae around, and you can see them. I will show you in the picture later, and then you can understand that this is a flowering head of the Aspergillus. And then this is your zygomycetes or your mucormycosis. Here, like Meera told you, it's a different kind of appearance, but it's the same description. They are very thin, they are fragile, they are ribbon-like structures. They are not uniform like what you see in this left end. They are very irregular. Very irregular, and the branching is also not acute angle, it's obtuse or right angles. So we can easily make out, and we can give you a rapid diagnosis in the lab, and you want to know whether you have disease-free margins during the surgery. So we'll be able to give you a result quickly. So once we see that, we put it into various media. These are the various media that are available. The commonest is Sabrose dextrose agar, which has a lot of sugar. So the fungi love to grow in it. This is the basal media. If you put antibiotics in it, like chloramphenicol and gentamicin, which we do, then you can even grow your samples from unsterile areas like sputum and urine can also be processed in that, and it is highly selective for fungi. If you put cyclohexamide in it, dermatophytes will grow, and we have a lot of other media. So once we have the cultures, you can see on the right side are very colorful organisms. These are Aspergillus. Aspergillus are usually green in color, flavus, yellowish green. Niger, as the name indicates, is black. Fumigatus is blue in color, and Tereus is brown in color. Whereas mucorales are not very exciting. They are really, we see only black and white. So initial colonies are white in color because they are immature spores. And once they start having mature spores, they have a lot of black spores. And so we call it salt and pepper appearance. So once we have it in the lab, you can, lactophenol cotton blue is a common stain that we use in mycology. It colors your fungi blue in color. So you take a drop, okay, so you take a drop on a clean glass slide, take the organism, take a scotch tape, you can touch it. It's a very simple technique. That's the reason why I have put it here. And then place it on the drop of lactophenol cotton blue and look at it under the light microscope. So before you look under the light microscope, you have to know what you're going to look at. And what you're going to see is what we're going to concentrate today is the mucorales, the organisms belonging to the order mucorales. And you have a lot of organisms under this: Apsidia, Apophysomyces, Mucor, Rhizomucor, Rhizopus. But unlike it's called mucorales, it's called Mucoraceae, but the commonest organism is Rhizopus. The Rhizopus has roots, as the name indicates, it has roots, and it has got a sporangiophore, which is the one that bears the sporangium. The sporangium is the fruiting body that even Meera showed you. These are circular structures with a lot of spores inside. Okay. And so, whereas in Aspergillus, I showed you the flowering head in the microscopy. So it's got a beautiful structure called the vesicle, around which there are phyllites and a lot of spores around. So these spores can also be seen sometimes in the histopathology. And this is called the conidiophore. So this is sporangiophore and this is conidiophore bearing the conidia. So the commonest what we see is the Rhizopus species, Rhizopus arisis and Rhizopus microsporus, followed by Apophysomyces. We rarely get the other organism. Listemia is the third commonest. It was called Apsidia before. Saxena, Cunninghamella, and Mucor are very, very rare, but we do isolate them, maybe 1 or 2 a year, but majority, maybe 30 to 40 per year, we see only Rhizopus. So this is like what we've seen mucormycosis over the years. So it's always been here. We've been seeing this both from ENT and also from hemato-oncology patients, solid organ transplant patients, and also from HIV patients. So we've seen an average of, around 25 to 40. Over the years, you can see during our first wave, we had around 82 samples, isolates, culture isolates, majority of rhizopus. And this year up to May 31st, we had 91 culture isolates positive. So once we have that, many of you would like to know if the patient is not responding to the usual amphotericin B, then you ask us to do drug susceptibility testing. It is available. There are a lot of methods available: micro broth dilution, macro broth dilution, calorimetric, automated Vitek methods, agar-based methods are also there. And what we do here is the CLSI recommended method for filamentous fungi is micro broth dilution. Here we do serial dilution of a media called RPMI 1640. And once we do that, we add a concentration of the organism. And here is the spores. And we look for the minimum inhibitory concentration. So in mucor, what we do is we take the organism, grow it well, so that we get the spores. We take the spores only, so non-sporulating organisms. So when you call us and we are not able to identify the organism because it doesn't have spores, then we will not be able to do antifungal susceptibility. So once we have that, we had a concentration of the organism into the diluted drug, and then we look for whether there is growth or not. So this is the range, and Dr. Rani is in charge of this section in our department, and she's done the study over from 2013 to 15, and she found a range of 0.06 to 2, and posaconazole, which we have tested, also from 0.06 to 16. There is no particular data available. We've also started testing isavuconazole, and the suggested susceptible MICs according to the CLSI guidelines is amphotericin 2 milligram per ml, micrograms per ml, and posaconazole 1 microgram per ml. So just very briefly, I'll go through the non-culture methods. We have antigen detection, antibody detection, and molecular methods. But for fungi, we do not use antibody detection because these fungi are there all around in the environment. Candida is there in our body. So we do not test for antibodies because almost all of us will have antibodies. So we look only for antigens. And we look for the DNA or the RNA of the particular organism. And this is mainly useful for patients who have invasive fungal disease. Invasive sinusitis is not invasive fungal disease. Invasive fungal disease is the infection that occurs in immunocompromised patients, like hematological malignancy patients on neutropenia, on chemotherapeutic drugs for cancer, and also immunosuppressive drugs. So these, what happens is these organisms spread from the lung to different parts of the body, and they can be detected. And what we detect in the antigen detection is the manoproteins, galactomannan, and the beta-D glucan. So 1,3-beta-D glucan. So we have galactomannan and beta-D glucan. You can look at the slide, but these are not for both. It's not useful for mucormycosis. For example, galactomannan is specific mainly for Aspergillus, whereas beta-D glucan is a polysaccharide antigen found everywhere except in mucormycosis and cryptococcosis. So it is not very useful for mucormycosis. So we can't use both these as markers. So somebody had asked me, are there any markers for mucormycosis in the chat box? No. Okay, so whether you can use CRP or not, I'll request one of the medical faculty to answer that question. But microbiological markers we do not have. We have a PCR. At the moment, we do a direct PCR from tissue samples which are smear positive but not growing, because culture, as you know, if between histopath and micro, there's around 20 to 30%, we are not able to culture it because something happens between the transport and how the sample is handled before it comes to the lab. So the sample, the culture depends on the type of sample you give. So molecular methods become very useful. There's ITS-PCR and 18S rRNA, rDNA PCR that we do in our lab. So most of this molecular diagnostics is around ITS region. Okay, so this is the fungal region, and you have the ITS region, which is highly specific, and then you have the 18S region also, which is used for molecular diagnostics. So this is done mainly on blood and serum, but newer techniques are coming where we can use other samples also. We do it directly also. We do sequencing from tissue samples. So it is available, and we'll be, please contact the lab if you need these special tests to be done. So this is my last but one slide. I would like to show you, this is a good review that has come in Lancet ID. This is an algorithm for all your patients who have mucormycosis. So how do you proceed, whether it's neutropenic or diabetic or trauma, or especially in patients from Asia or China. Please do your radiology first, followed by take the sample. If you suspect mucormycosis, take your sample and send it for histopathology and direct microscopy, culture, as well as for molecular identification. As you can see here, there are no markers suggested. So please follow conventional diagnostics of radiology, pathology, and microbiology, and you will be able to get a better answer with those. So in conclusion, mucormycosis is a fungal infection commonly we have seen in immunocompromised hosts and those with uncontrolled diabetes. In the COVID era, as has been discussed last time and also today, it has increased during this COVID pandemic first and now more in the second pandemic. It's an angioinvasive disease, so it's an emergency. So early diagnosis is crucial because you will get mortality if you don't diagnose it early. So please follow, take the help of your lab colleagues in CMC and wherever you are, because it is very essential for appropriate management of mucormycosis. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Joy, for the very detailed and very lucid lecture. Now we are open to questions. All three speakers are available to answer any questions from you. While the talk has been going on, we have been answering questions on the chat box. Some important questions will be discussed right now. To set the ball rolling, this is a radiological question. What was the finding that was mentioned as pathognomonic of mucor?
The finding that is pathognomonic for mucor is usually non-enhancement of any of the turbinates, the mucosa in the nasal turbinates, nasal cavity, any of the mucosa which does not enhance in any of the paranasal sinuses or vital apex. These are all pathognomonic for angioinvasion of any type of either mucor or even aspergillus, as the case may be.
Dr. Meera, this question is for you. If the frozen section facility is not available, how does one proceed?
If you don't have frozen section, you can actually do a rapid processing. There are two machines available, either the Leica pylorus or Thermo Shandon, which will allow you to process sections within 2 to 4 hours. So you can send the sample, and if you cannot do a frozen, send it for rapid processing in either a Leica or a Thermo Shandon. For a frozen, all you need actually is a cryostat, which is, if possible, about 20 to 25 lakhs. I think every hospital needs it.
The next question we'll be taking is the question of what to treat when both mucor and aspergillus are present. And this is a request for any ID or medicine consultant to answer. So please type in the chat box if you have an answer to this question. The next question is, in the current epidemic, which is more, Rhizopus or mucor? So the answer is Rhizopus.
We see more of Rhizopus. We haven't seen much of aspergillosis yet. It's mainly mucor that has gone up. Aspergillosis is there, but it's same as before. It hasn't increased in proportion.
The media for white and yellow fungus.
The different colored fungi that the media is talking about is all misnomer. Black fungus is mucormycosis. White fungus is actually Candida. And yellow fungus, nobody knows, because the person who talked about it, we have talked to various mycologists in that area, and they feel it's one type of aspergillus, or it can be even a variant of one of the mucorales. But please do not go by the colors of the fungi, because different fungi have different colors. Please call it by their names. So please don't call it by their colors.
Okay, the next question is there a radiological staging for ROCM? Dr. Joshua, can you come and take this question? Is there a radiological staging for ROCM?
So there is no accepted radiological staging yet, but I would highly suggest that we go by the clinical staging, which divides it into isolated rhino nasal disease, and then look for disease in the pterygopalatine fossa, retromaxillary region, pterygoid infratemporal fossa region, and if that is present, then it becomes stage 2. Stage 3 is there's orbital involvement or intracranial involvement. So stage 1, 2, and 3 are clinical stages, and I think the radiologist should stick to this so that we are better in communicating with our referring clinicians. Thank you.
The next question is, can we send the sample the day after surgery?
Yes, you can send the sample the day after, but remember, if you're sending it the day after, it has to be kept in formalin. It cannot be kept in saline because the tissue will autolyze.
The next is for Meera again. If frozen sections are non-contributory, my understanding is that further surgery and management is directed by the clinical and radiological picture. Is that true?
Yeah. If the radiology is suggestive of mucor, they usually go ahead. We do frozens now. Actually, we have a 24/7 rota for frozen only for mucor because it's now a notifiable disease. So if we say negative for invasion by mucor, they go by radiology, but they do not do excentration of the orbit unless we give them a diagnosis of invasive mucor. They only do debridement.
There is a lot of questions around the same thing about frozen section being negative and how do we proceed next. So Meera has already answered that. The alveolar changes will not be seen in dental infections. So how to differentiate it from mucor? Dr. Joshua, would you like to take this one?
In our experience, we have seen a few cases where dental infection, caries infection, which has caused invasion. But in the current COVID, in the last few months, if there is sinonasal disease, we are seeing a lot of alveolar process being eroded. Although they say in the acute stage, it may be very difficult. We have seen a few cases where there are subtle erosions, and surgically they have resected it, and that has come as bone invasion positive. So these subtle changes actually make a change. Dental infection per se causing bone erosions, we have not seen so much, but sinonasal disease causing bone erosion of the alveolar process is what we have been observing.
Yeah. Is Blancophore stain the most sensitive method to detect mucor? If only one or two hyphae are seen, what is the significance?
I think I answered that during the talk. Blancophore is similar to calcofluor. It doesn't increase the sensitivity. It just enhances the visibility of the fungal hyphae in the tissue. And you get a rapid answer because if you put plain KOH, it takes a longer time. So put it along with KOH and you'll get a better result. And there is no sensitivity or specificity with using these two stains. It just increases the chances of you picking it up, and you should see it under a fluorescent microscope. I think there were some other questions regarding growing Candida and Aspergillus and all these organisms, Aspergillus, mucor, and Candida will all grow on Sabrous dextrose agar, so you don't have to have different media. But if you're going to isolate these organisms from sputum or from urine, then please put Sabrous dextrose agar with antibiotics. When you have one of the questions are, if Aspergillus and Candida are there, depends on the site. For example, if you are taking it from a nasal tissue, okay, superficial nasal tissue and not deep, you can have normal flora there as Candida, or you're taking it from a respiratory sample you can have Candida as normal flora. So be careful, look at the clinical details, because when you have two organisms, depending on your clinical details, depending on the chest X-ray, the filamentous fungi will be considered as a pathogen because Candida is a normal flora in our body. But also please keep in mind Aspergillus and Muca are there in the environment. That's why I said deeper tissues are very important for diagnosis.
With that, we have answered almost all the questions that were addressed to us. This session will be available in the following website, and the link. This is the link to go to the website, and also you have access to all the other COVID presentations that have been made from CMC Vellore. I thank all the speakers for sharing their expertise. I hope all the audience queries have been answered. To reiterate, this session is available online for you to refer to anytime you want. Good evening and thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Elizabeth. On behalf of the COVID Command Center Training Desk, I'd like to thank our moderator and the speakers for a very lively and engaging and a very informative session. And thank you all, those in the audience. We hope the session shared by experts was timely and meaningful. And thank you all of you for making it so interactive. I mean, so many questions were coming up on the chat box. And also we are watching on the YouTube chat box. A lot of people were asking very queries. So I hope we have tried to answer most of it. And as we have shared the session, once the video is available, the recording is available, it will be hosted on the YouTube channel of CMC. And also as a reminder, we try to bring out topics which are relevant in this pandemic times. And coming up on 14 June, that is Monday, evening 4 to 5 p.m., we have a session planned on COVID-19 in children, and hope that session also will be useful for all of you. So once more, thank all of you and have a safe and good evening. God bless.